Some feel that parkland trails need to be better maintained or even expanded. Others don't like seeing people walking on the trails and advocate for less or only limited, if any, public access to the parklands. What role do you see PVHA playing when it comes to access to and the maintenance of trails and parklands?
The parklands and right-of-way are owned by the city. So the responsibility of the PVHA is more of a sentinel, to be sure, like from an encroachment standpoint that we talked a little bit about earlier, that if there's encroachments, they should be resolved. People shouldn't be encroaching. Those restrictions should be enforced. As far as using parklands, that's an entitlement that the residents have in living here. It's in our deed restrictions. We can use them for recreational purposes. So to say that, if somebody buys a home next to a trail or next to parkland, they know that when they buy it. And there's been some situations, maybe some of you are aware, where somebody didn't like the fact that he didn't do enough due diligence to know that he bought a home right next to a trail. And he didn't like people walking on it that sometimes he could hear walking behind his home. You need to do your due diligence anytime you buy a home. If you buy a home that has an encroachment, if it's next to a trail, you should be willing to accept that and not try to change it for your own benefit. So as far as maintenance on the trails, I think there are some issues where we have different types of trails. I've actually categorized and labeled, I'm familiar with 30 miles of trails in PVE. Some of them are like asphalt, like when you come in, that they do need to be maintained. They get cracked. There's some other ones that are fine as far as their natural way. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
Parklands.
Okay, what role do you see PVHA playing when it comes to access to and maintenance of the trails and parklands?
Okay, the maintenance of the parklands, if they're owned by the city, should be a city responsibility. As far as use of the trails and parklands, it would seem to me that, as Reed had pointed out, as residents of this community, we have bought into our property as well as the use of the parklands. The nature of parklands is just it should be a natural preserve in terms of being able to use it and without a lot of maintenance involved in the parklands. And so at this point in time, I don't think the PVHA should have much of a role in maintaining the trails and parklands, and other than to make sure the encroachments are not violated.
Okay, thank you. Down to Marlene.
It's true that it's the city responsibility to maintain the parklands, although I see no reason why PVHA could not advocate to make sure that the city does maintain things properly, so we can as residents be able to enjoy these areas that are given to us by virtue of our CC&Rs. They're meant for recreation, and those pathways were designed by Olmsted between houses and in various areas so that residents could walk from one street to another to visit a neighbor. Back at the time when our city was designed, cars were not as prolific as now. So people did a lot more walking, and these trails were intended to make it easy to be neighborly and to enjoy what the city has to offer. So yes, so I think that the PVHA, although they do not actually maintain the parkland areas, I think we can certainly set some standards and encourage the city to do their job properly.
Thank you. Jane?
I echo what Marlene says about it's the city's responsibility, but this does bring up a very good point. We need to have better communication with the city. And we're very happy to see one of our city councilmen here tonight, listening very intently. I'm very happy, and thank you for coming. So what we really need to do is synchronize a lot of overlapping responsibilities, advocate for what we do represent, maybe help out the city in other ways and give feedback to them, synchronize, collaborate, communicate, and share. I think sharing is a really good point here. And Marlene brings this up. We all should be more neighborly and get all of the communities together. So my point here is let's get digital, let's get more into the 20th, 21st century, and email, communicate better, archive all of our messages together, and synchronize. Thank you.
Thank you. Dick?
Well, I do understand that it basically the city's responsibility. I agree with Marlene that we could play a role in working with the city on this. I have nothing really too original to say that has not been said by the 5 people ahead of me.
Okay, thank you. John?
It is the city's role to maintain the parks for public recreational use. It is also the PVHA's role to intervene and even exercise reversionary rights if the city doesn't perform those roles properly. To give you an example, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a move to close down part of the Paseo del Sol Fire Road up on the hillside here. And a group of residents along Via Elvado objected to the fact that people were walking behind their house on this road, and they said this was a new trail. I pointed out that one of those pictures in the hall out there from 1925 shows that trail and none of those houses. So, but anyway, and instead of the PVHA, in that case, the city did the right thing and denied it, but the PVHA actually wrote a letter. The president of the PVHA wrote a letter in support of putting a fence isolating 8 acres of parkland for the private use of the people on Via Elvado with no trespassing signs. I mean, the PVHA is going the wrong way, but I do think that the way it should work is that we should be looking after those requirements and intervene when it's necessary to try to make sure the city does follow the rules. And we do have some leverage in that through the reversionary rights.